Marriage of Heaven and Hell, William Blake. He has this section called The Proverbs of Hell.
The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. I feel like we saloned about...
It might have come up.
I feel like this came up in Salon, too.
Yeah, it's... Well, when? Recently? Or at some point?
At some point, it's like vibes of, like, intensity as such, and, like, some philosopher or poet had, like, things divided into, like passion is for hell and justice is for heaven.
Yeah, and he was
but then
kind
you
of...
have to mix them to be human.
Yeah, and it was William Blake, English poet, had a big influence on... he was the one who actually, apparently he coined the term doors of perception, which was then adopted by Huxley, which then became the band The Doors. So Blake has had an outside influence on... He was in hippie shit in the 1790s.
Yeah.
So he, I think, was one of the first Western poets. He's seen as a pre-romantic poet, and he grasped this sublime unity between good and evil that I found like really compelling. And the Proverbs of Hell are kind of his attempt to bring out the wisdom in what is often seen as like, what in his day was like the disintegration of society into like the pious and the sinners and like all the authoritarian structures that were built on that. But he was a revolutionary. I'll read just like a few of them.
Yeah.
I found really compelling. So it just starts off, in seed time learn, in harvest teach, in winter enjoy. Drive your cart and your plow over the bones of the dead. The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. Prudence is a rich, ugly old maid counted or courted by incapacity. He who desires but acts not breeds pestilence. The cut worm forgives the plow.
The cut worm forgives the plow. That's pretty fucking intense.
It's pretty fucking intense. And then he goes on, dip him in the river who loves water. A fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees. He whose face gives no light shall never become a star. Eternity is in love with the productions of time. The busy bee has no time for sorrow. The hours of folly are measured by the clock, but of wisdom, no clock can measure.
You're starting to overwhelm me.
It's fucking amazing, I know, but I'm just gonna throw it at you. I'm gonna just spit some William Blake, you know? He's speaking to us from 1790. It's fucking amazing. I'm just so glad there was this kind of people back then. I'll just say a couple more. One of them that really stood out to me, I'm skipping a few things. Okay, here's one that you're really gonna like.
Okay.
No bird soars too high if he soars with his own wings.
Okay. Yeah.
And he has in here, he says, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. And I'm like, where have I heard that before? Fucking Alan Watts. Alan Watts says that all the time.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess he probably got that from William Blake, so it's crazy. And then one of them is, shame is pride's cloak. I was like, holy shit, that is relevant to 2022.
How so?
Like, if virtuizing shame is done out of a sense of pridefulness, like obviously, like I don't know, I think it speaks to the motivations of it's you can see that with religious people or woke people or people of that bent, is that if you go around telling other people you should be ashamed of who you are for X, Y, or Z, it's probably because you're very prideful. Because like you can't feel ashamed without. This is the dualism thing. You can't feel ashamed without holding in your mind this idea of being very proud if you were the opposite of that thing. Like this is the Bob Dylan thing. You know, if you hold high and carry the banner of anti whatever. That's a lot of pride to be, shame and pride are like this polarizing field that depend on each other.
Yeah. You dost protest too much.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a good, like, life advice one that went, he who desires but acts not breeds pestilence.
Oh, yeah, that was one of the most powerful ones for me.
That's pretty, That's good. it's like this pressure on what I like, which is being selfish and speaking your truth. It's like, do that or else. Like your muscles have appetites. If you don't use your muscles, then they like atrophy.
Yeah, he restates this. He restates that further on in this poem. He says, "Sooner murder an infant in its cradle than nurse unacted desires."
Yeah, because it riffing on Jordan Peterson, it breeds resentment.
Yeah.
To have unacted desires.
Oh, it's toxic and will consume you.
And then evil actions can appear justified.
Yeah.
That's cool. It's just from one poem. It's a lot.
This is only like half of it too. There's more.
And I imagine in his day is so much more stress.
Yeah.
Presumably stress on the polarities of heaven and hell. And so he was partly empowered to say all that just because it was visible to everyone. Everyone was, I'm presuming that everyone was acting this out. Just no one was able to like put it into words.
Yeah.
And so he was like, oh, I have to like articulate this like turntable thing everyone's doing with what they say and what they do.
Yeah, he was bringing integration. He was like Jung before Jung, like centuries before Jung. His most famous thing is probably about this. I think it was actually, I think one of these quotes was it was like in the beginning of Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins, who we talked about a couple weeks ago, quoted this, and then I remembered this. He says, the wrath of the lion, the wrath of the lion is the wisdom of God. The nakedness of woman is the work of God. Excess of sorrow laughs. Excess of joy weeps. And this is what I found really interesting, and it's something we've talked about before too, about in terms of like, why does evil exist? Well, his take is that, he says, the roaring of lions, the howling of wolves, the raging of the stormy sea, and the destructive sword are portions of eternity too great for the eye of man. The fox condemns the trap, not himself.
What does that last line mean, though? What's that mean?
So what it means...
The fox condemns the trap, not himself.
What I take that to mean is that, so his previous line where he said, the raging of lions, the storms, the sea, the sword, like war, evil, destruction, all this stuff, they're parts of eternity that are too great for the eye of man. So he's basically saying, almost like kind of like what Jung echoed, that there's like evil is a naturalistic thing, right? But that doesn't mean that you should accept it. And you can't be passive. You still have to fight against it. And that's like the fox doesn't accept
okay, so...
that it's his destiny to go into the trap.
There's this word, there's like a subtracted word of regardless, comma, the fox...
I think so.
What is the word again?
The fox condemns the trap, not himself.
Yeah, so...
Because in order for that tension...
If the fox took William Blake's poem too seriously, he would then be like, this is part of eternity. Yeah. It's only me to blame.
And it would rob all the creative tension from these evil things, and they would just be something that you're just waiting over too passively to... Because the whole point of evil destruction things is to create people who resist them. That's the whole necessity of them. Like...
Yeah, you obey. If you're rational and like responsive, you have abilities to solve the evil effects.
Yes.
Just by perceiving them, you're like physiologically then like adapted to, okay, fix that.
Yeah, and the meta invocation of this whole thing is that you have to play the game, motherfucker. There's no... Don't think you can't think your way out of this, because that's like that demonic reason brain that just he kind of rails against in other portions of this poem is this brain that like tries to generalize everything instead of seeing the value in the particular, which is really important for me to remember.
Yeah, but then it's not quite like applicable to today's situation without some tailoring of the advice, because we're being assailed and presented with things we're supposed to respond to that are super evil, and told how we're supposed to respond to them. And forward motion has largely been by filtering out the evil effects that the culture is telling me I'm supposed to be focused on.
Well, that might just, maybe you could just say that it's important to then see the evil as it's the distraction. See that clearly, that the attempt to make you squander your time fixated on the things that you're supposed to be fixated on that's what you should resist.
Well, what at least you and I can agree on that you read into those words was that you have to play the game.
Yeah.
You have to really be active in this, and
so
over-focus on the evils as if you can fix them, or ignoring them. It's a danger if it's stopped up your engagement.
Yeah.
Like whatever is freeing up your vital energy to really like fight this thing in a really vital, enjoyable way.
Because it's up to you.
Ticket.
It's up to you what the game is. It's up to you to decide what the game is.
See, that's not an established tenet. It's a given for me.
It's a given for me.
But that's not a given.
You mean it's not commonly understood?
Let's say that again.
Well, I was just saying that in response to, when I mean, what you do is you have to play the game.
And then you said like we choose the game.
Yeah, it's up to you. It's up to you to decide what the game is that you're playing. You just can't be passive. So if the game is, I'm going to spend my life, hate tweeting about this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing. If that's what you think the game is, you can play it. Or maybe the game to you is, I'm going to resist the attempts to drag my energy into these negative vortexes, and I'm going to stay focused on something positive. Maybe that's the game. That's more or less probably in a word what I see as the game.
But people...
Maintaining your own energy.
People in stupid fucking games have justification for being there. That a lot... I never got out of any stupid games I was playing until I noticed that it was an option, and until that point it wasn't an option. It was compulsory. It was necessary. I had to do these unpleasant things. I had to live this unpleasant life. I was forced to.
What brought about that change in awareness?
Psychedelics. Watching Waking Life, the movie by Richard Linklater. And that movie is just a whole bunch of essays made really visually beautiful. Just like essays and monologues just dumped on you of like philosophy 101 for 2 hours straight, with a general leaning towards dreams. Aren't those weird? And what about lucid dreaming? That's even weirder, isn't it? What is that? What is life? Could we be sleepwalking through a dream of this conscious life we're sharing that could be made more lucid?
And would we want it to be more lucid? I would, but I think it's important.
You say that, but you also say the opposite quite often.
That's true, don't I?
You very consciously have these horse blinders up because you have a sense of there only being so much time to engage in so much of the world.
Well, I guess maybe check out that fucking like hawk or something. Oh, that's a buzzard. Never mind.
But like being lucid in this dream would be like, okay, well, I'll change the parameters on my own OS so my RAM is now up 50x. And now I can learn about all those things and explore all those avenues.
Yeah.
Because I just changed the dream rules.
I think, yeah, that's true. I guess I do have this bias towards being like sort of like keeping my aperture really focused. Because maybe there's a lurking fear in me that I'll just squander all my time. Maybe I'll just, return to the state of being like that hella ADH boy who can start 50 billion things and has 50 million new ideas per day and never follows through on any of them.
I see. So
that's my adolescent.
You're responding to that.
My adolescent experience and my standard brain is like I can come up with a lot of new. Like if you told me on the spot right now to come up with like 50 new inventions, I could probably come up with 50 stupid inventions. Not that's a bad example, but like it's that kind of thing. That's what my point is. That's what I get excited about. I get excited about spitting up ideas, and then when someone says like, okay, well, that's going to take a lot of boring, backtracking and figuring out, and like, I'm like less excited about that. And so with something like my current project, I've just made it like to me it's like a holy mission. It's like a sacred like thing that I'm like personally in love with and I'm like hell bent on seeing through for reasons that are like bigger than interest. It's more of like function of my identity. I'm like highly attached to it in a very willing way. In much in the same way that you like must be fully willing to become highly attached and like identified with personal relationships that you want to pursue. I mean, that's just my view on it. Otherwise, like, why have relationships if you're not going to like go all in? Like, why? What are you doing? Like, you're gonna die. Like, why not go all in? That's why I feel like with my current project, and that's why I've never lost interest in it in 4 years. But my life prior to that was, pretty much just searching around for months and months and months to find something that I felt that way about, going all in, seeing it through, and then going back into the wilderness of like, oh, what is there even to do? I was fucking bored, just like walking around, hella distracted, hella just like scrolling my phone for hours and hours, and it's like dopamine, like, and that's what I'm afraid of probably. Deep down is like having, like, if I widen my aperture and be like, maybe I'll take a day off. Like, ooh, the devil's like, take a day off. And I'm like, no.
Didn't I just start this pod with William Blake?
Okay. People think that Blake is
Take
advocating.
That day off.
He's not advocating for the devil. He's advocating for the angels and the devil, and he's advocating for for humanity, seeing as we're living in the Middle Earth. He's advocating for us having a relationship that is having maximal.
Well, I think that's the proper way to think about an omniscient, infinitely loving God is, okay, then this existence is to assist the education and development of me.
Yeah.
And so that means the devil is here as a good part of things, and he has things the other players don't have, or he wouldn't be on this board.
He's there so that you can have a protagonist and an antagonist, and you can have drama.
And so that there is a steward for everything you don't want to admit about your identity.
Oh,
yet.
Interesting.
So those orphans of yourself don't die because the devil has a room for them until you're ready to take responsibility for those things.
So Jesus is storing up treasures for you in heaven, and the devil is storing up vices for you in hell. Thanks, guys. We trust that you're both gonna feed us these things like as we're ready for them. Wow. This is why I think I can't remember. Yeah, makes me think. Alan Watts. He said that he thinks Job is the most profound book in the Bible.
Okay.
Because it's like this. Just a man being toyed with by God and the devil constantly the whole time. And it's something that's resonant about human life there in a way that's really transcends cultures and times.
Yeah, the way that story's hitting me right now is that Job should have put his big boy pants on and like, okay, am I the most mature one in the room, God, Satan?
He should have just gone goth and started a punk band.
Yeah. Like,
fuck you, God!
Rise above this petty drama from the parents.
It would have been called Black Sheep. Then he would have painted all of his thousands of sheep black. And yeah, that dude had quite a life. If you really take literally, he had 20 wives or something, and 1,000 camels, and 50 sons, and then I don't know if this is actually true numbers, but something like that. The dude was a crazy.
That's like old times oligarch.
Yeah, and then he died or whatever. All the people died.
Basically.
All the pestilence came, all this stuff, and then by the end of the thing, somehow he got 12 more wives. How did you manage that? And then more camels, more cows. I'm like, that seems like. Is there really?
No, that makes.
What was the economy like back then?
That makes sense to me, bro.
He's just like.
I can see that happening.
Yeah, totally possible. Anyways.
What my prompt was protagonism lately.
Yeah.
And maybe I can
lead off with
think about that. Your protagonism lately, that has to be like a personal tale of there's some place where your will hasn't yet exerted itself out into, and what your relationship is to facing that. Protagonism is being about it is about locking in with your natural facility to walk forward, so that is biological and instinctual, but it's also a aggressive pushing. The resistance increases that will to push through a thing. Or it's the protagonism also is the will conquering your desires.
Conquering your desires.
Or your mind conquering your body. If we're using Blake Heaven and Hell, prude times metaphors, your mind conquering your base animal desires.
The old hag who courts incapacity, in his words. You think he also said something prisons are built with bricks of religion, and brothels are built with the power of law, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
I think Blake was on it.
Yeah, seems like it.
He was also contemporaries of Mary Wollstonecraft. She was kind of the OG feminist, who was against marriage, legal marriage. She was very much but they all hung out at the same house. And would these people all knew each other. They were all in London. The 1790s sounded like it was pretty lit. That was before there was there was no such thing as a police force before that time anywhere.
Well, so
there was just the King's Men. There was the King's Men.
All I'm doing is flashing back to this moment from the far future, some dudes going like, the 2020s seemed fucking lit.
Is it lit?
There was no dystopian opticon. What's the word?
Panopticon.
They were just winging it out in the wild.
They didn't even have houses. They had to podcast in a park.
Oh, is there a historical distortion where in history's eyes we're homeless? Because we only film out in nature.
I'm surprised more homeless people don't start podcasts.
Or maybe there's like 3D printed Wi-Fi ordered food there in the future. So it doesn't enter their minds that we would ever need to return to a home, because as far as they're concerned, we could just be out here eternally, because we just press a 3D button and food gets like downloaded from the cloud. And
okay, I'd actually be all for that.
They don't even think to consider that, like, we don't have that, so we would have to not be in the park sometimes.
Everyone just in the Wall-E chair, just like uploading content 24/7 via Neuralink to like, you have to pay taxes based on how much time you're offline or something like that. Selfishness. Yeah. Have you ever seen Japanese pastries that look like, to me those look like they're 3D printed, like a little green cake that's like a cube.
Well, rice.
Okay, yeah, it's rice.
Is
glutinous and very.
Yeah, the things you can do with smashed rice, and that's a form of expression they've been working on for
a long time. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And then, you add machines to what they already know about rice, and it's over.
Sculpt a little, like a really interesting little sculptures out of it,
But protagonism lately. I can share an anecdote. I have no idea if it's my protagonism. I guess it probably is. But I was on a drive, and then I sent out a text to a girl, and then I was like, oh shit, I haven't sent that kind of a text in a while. Now I'm in waiting for the response from girl mode.
Oh yeah.
With everything that comes with that.
Oh yeah, I know that mode.
It's
been a few years since I've been in that mode, but I know that mode.
But the phone is this like glowing coal.
You're like auditory hallucinations of like notifications, like did it beep? Yeah.
So I didn't realize that I was gonna trigger that mode until I was in it. But then I was driving, and so like, okay, my world, like, I'll spend like 8 fucking hours working and sitting with myself before the entire world even is like awake. So I was like intimately with that moment. And
was this early in the morning?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I was going, okay, I remember this thing. It's been a while, but like since the last time I had this waiting for girl to respond mode, I have become much more impatient or unwilling that anything should be unpleasant in my experience. And so like face towards this, work this out, and I went, okay, well, I'll just do that mode of mind on purpose, really intentionally, like really hard, waiting for girl to respond. I'm waiting for the girl to respond. I'm waiting for the girl to respond.
Gotcha.
Just like, I'm doing it on purpose. I'm thinking that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that.
Yeah.
Look at that phone.
Nice. It almost sounds like that's like what Bo Burnham does a lot, is he takes something like that's like ordinarily like this like involuntary and then like he just like acts it out hella strong. Yeah, it's good. It's good shit.
So that's where it started. And so I was doing it and exploring it and being like, okay, this is what I do with demons is, okay, you are vestigial, cramped little rosebuds. You need my affirmation as a id. You need my love. You need my care to blossom into something useful.
So you're not this little like goblin like hiding in the dark.
You're this little goblin hiding in the dark because I haven't loved you enough. Me speaking to my sub-self.
Dobie.
Yeah.
Yeah, hiding in the, yeah.
Yeah, so like
Right.
taking account for like, okay, this is not an ideal sub-self. This is sapping my energy. This is using my RAM, and it's not producing value. Everything in my mind, if it's going to use RAM, it needs to produce art, or it's gonna put, or it's gonna make my engine grindy. And then I'm remembering this as I tell the story, and I haven't thought about this anecdote since it happened on the drive. So I hope I can keep it as a smooth story. Yeah. So this is about where all emotions, I think, have real traceable sources. Things I don't think things can just strike you out of nowhere. Then that like mode, then it would like switch or change periodically, and then I would like have to mentally stand back and be like, oh, okay, I don't know what my mental state is now. I don't know what the emotional, just experience this for a moment. And then it went into this like other mode of, okay, what happens next in waiting for girl to respond wheel is expecting to be punished by myself for doing something.
For daring.
I think is an unideal use of my time.
Oh, use of time. Interesting.
Like, I shouldn't be focused on this. I don't want to be focused on this. I'm compelled to be focused on this, but I punish myself for it. And I expect to be punished for it. And I expect to feel shame for it. So then, like...
So what are you prideful of?
Prior to the blowback of those emotions was the sub-self reading out to me its script of like, well, this is next on what we're gonna experience together.
That's nice of your sub-self to do that.
Well, I was being very nice to it.
I'm glad you managed to make that bridge of communication. That seems like progress.
Yes.
Great.
And it produced a lot of compassion in me for myself of like, oh gosh, that's true. I am like, and it's going to be like untraceable emotions at that point. And like things that aren't in my power, and like, oh, it's these things that girl said back, or it's these things that got ignored, but it's really like, no, you just feel bad about focusing your mind in an inefficient way. And so the response from girl you're waiting for could be fucking anything, and you'd still feel like shit about it. So I untangled that whole new like flow of undeveloped behavioral responses by acting out that idea I've had a couple times the last few podcasts off the Dasha Catholicism bent, where
taking things to their extreme and just seeing what happens.
Where it doesn't matter what path to God you're taking, it's the way you take that path.
You're just persisting in your folly.
Yeah.
Till you find wisdom.
That's right.
Yeah. Because is it really folly if you know you're doing it? If you know what you're seeking, is there any wrong path? I mean, there's probably paths that are harder than others, but yeah, it's interesting the way you described that whole scenario. It makes me think about how it's really interesting how like different inhibitions or sources of guilt or whatever are like, they masquerade as other ones.
They do.
which is crazy. And they're like masks. So there's masks behind where you're like, are you really feeling bad about this? Or is that just you? Is it just that you really feel bad about this, but you can't admit it? So you're like,
That's right.
you know, and yeah, that's probably that's probably a universal thing in some way. That's kind of what defines the boundary about how much you really know yourself. Because, like, you know, there's obviously people who are just really unself-aware. That's so obvious to other people that you're just using something as an excuse for why you can't, you know, like the drunken, raging alcoholic who's just like, you know, goes home and like, you bitch, like you're the source of all my problems. It's like, no, you're a fucking alcoholic. You know, that's like the most obvious example kind of thing. But like that same little thingy plays out in, you know, little subtle, it's like a little circus of goblins down there in the dark. And they're just always pretending. They're scurrying away like cockroaches under the glaring light of the God-conscious mind that wants to look at them all and bring them into the world.
But then if they're scurrying away, you have to take responsibility for that.
And not be pissed off at them.
Okay, why do my goblins not feel welcome to come tell me what their shit is that they can't grow into sick-ass looking moth warrior thingies?
They're fucking cocoon from the ceiling. Chrysalis.
How can I do my job better as the steward of all these multiplicity of selves inside me?
Well, that's like what... Okay, this is kind of out there, but maybe you have to be God there and not the devil. Like, you have to forgive your little goblins because they're goblins, see? They're like little dark demons.
You do have to be God, the loving Father, God. And
then when when you're dealing with your internal goblins, like, you should probably put on your Jesus robes, and then maybe when you're dealing with the external world and you're dealing with like political structures.
Oh yes, that's great.
Then you put on your devil robes.
Because
you say, "I'm Lucifer, bitch."
That is when I've been Lucifer, intentionally and for a purpose. Yeah. It's in to the outside kind of a context. Mm-hmm. The only way that this outside context will let me do what needs to be done is if, or like the outside context is declared this necessary route of behavior that's the needed path forward as evil. So that means I have to put on my evil robes to go do what's needed.
Well, you have to be a light bringer. Like, you have to, because, even those little sub-selves, those little scurrying demons in your sub-self, they're potential light bringers, potentially, if you got into communion with them, if you got into communication with them. And so, like, there's an analogous relationship between your God-mind consciousness trying to develop those relationships, and, like, that's a similar relationship that you have to the world at large and all of, like, the big social structures that you live inside that are trying to cast you and have expectations about what's appropriate and what you should be ashamed of. And so you need to invite that gaze upon yourself and try to have a relationship with the world. Something like that, maybe. Like, I'm just thinking there's but that reinforces that idea of a human as this shape-shifting middle kind of God-devil hybrid, changing your clothing all the time kind of role.
Well, we're this extra dimensional thing from that mix. I think we're the narrative writers. I think we perceive the narrative we're creating. Like a human, it is that mix of like God and devil and stuff. But then if you just put it in a Hindu upbringing, you've never heard of Jesus, you've never heard of the devil, and your psyche is...
It's just the mini masks of Maya.
Set of rules that's like way different. And we are new God, the first causes. Each person is a completely new nexus of potentially like brand new rule sets for brand new universes. Yeah,
that narrative, the maker of the narrative thing is pretty interesting. It makes me think of what I texted you a few days ago about those lyrics that I listened to from Tallest Man on Earth. And it goes, rumor has it that I wasn't born. I just walked in one frosty morn into the vision of some vacant mind.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, like, that there's this kind of, it's sort of, to me, it's like the answer to the question of why, that like, there's a mind is vacant when it doesn't see itself. Like you could have a mind.
Okay.
A mind can just get on perfectly fine doing all kinds of brain things and just going throughout your life and stuff. But there isn't. If there the you that kind of walks in and like decides to make that experience,
like, to exert will on the NPC processes,
to witness it, to you like maybe like so. Imagine the image in my mind was like a child that grows up and is just a baby, and for a few years he's learning to talk and just doesn't know, and then at some point there's this flash of the first time a baby ever, and for me I don't know if I really remember when that was, but there must have been the first time I ever felt, oh yeah, I'm me. That was the moment that I walked into the mind of Stuart Bowman.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
It was a spectrum for me. It was this gradient. It was not like one moment.
You mean that you've become more and more, so have I, to more and more like, but there must have been a 0 to 1 moment at some point.
Not necessarily.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think that's how consciousness births into.
But what was the first articulated thought?
Depends on the personality of the soul. There's as many ways to do it as there are souls, but certainly for me it was this gradient.
Yeah, like a person is kind of a synthesis of like the mind you're in and then the nature of the soul that's in the mind, and that creates a unique combination that
plays out in time in a characteristic way.
That's what that's the William Blake eternity is in love with the productions of time.
Yeah, that's cool. That's
productions, like a theatrical production.
That's I vibe with that in a hippie context where like the hippie take drugs and be young and stuff is like, well, why should I commit to anything? I just want to enjoy the everything. And then it's, well, the everything craves form. That's why you should commit to something.
TikTok on the clock, but the party don't stop, yo.
But if you never stop the party, then you never get to make a brand new party for your progenitors or your descendants. I don't know what progenitor, which direction.
Progenitor comes before.
I don't know which direction that word is in time.
Oh God, don't go all Tenet on me. That's true.
I already said Tenet once this pod.
I didn't catch that.
It was a dangerous moment. It was because I went, you said that, what the fuck did you say?
Doesn't matter.
You said some shit about people are choosing which games they want to play.
Okay,
I was like, that's not an accepted tenet. A widely accepted tenet. A lot of people believe they're forced into the games that they are in. And do you want to explore anything of your protagonism lately?
I'm trying to think if I've done anything out of character recently. I feel like if I did, that's the only way to know that you're real. That's the only way to make contact with your will, is to do something that you wouldn't have done if you hadn't have been paying attention. From a certain point of view.
For sure.
So... I spent the last 2 days doing paperwork, which was very uncharacteristic of me. Very uncharacteristic of me.
For Stripe?
No, for making a legal corporation. So that was fun.
That's very on the grid of you, for someone who seeks to be camouflaged.
Yeah, it's necessary, unfortunately. But it was the first time I ever felt like doing paperwork had the potential to be creative, because I started thinking about, it just made me think about how the government is seriously just a computer. Like, and when I thought of it that way, I faced my fears against, because I remember, I really think that when I think I have like, I hate this whole like trauma thing. Everyone always, saying everything's because of trauma, but this is one of the exceptions to that. Okay, but I do think that I have some latent post-traumatic report card experiences where I just like grew up being just always getting in trouble constantly for any time a letter came in the mail that showed that I got like a D in science class because I didn't do any homework assignment the entire semester. And that was pretty much just the constant of my life from like kindergarten to 12th grade.
And just like a sense of dread permeating. You were waiting for the next.
That eventually masticized into like a fiery, burning rebellion and just desire to smash the system and like just not, you know what I mean? Like be like, no, like I'm going to do my own, like this grade doesn't represent me. I just hate doing homework and don't have a planner, and I write things on my hand in Sharpie and forget about it.
Yeah.
But this paperwork thing has dogged me for many years, but
that's big.
Yeah, but I found that forming the corporation was kind of fun in some way, because you got to choose a lot of parameters and you got to figure out how to like navigate the labyrinthine, Kafka-esque, entropy-ridden wreckage of history.
I hate it so much.
That is like the corporate tax
just
code.
Wandering in a Kafka-esque castle office back rooms.
Yeah, where it's like this haunted by like the spirit of like the Dutchman who like first founded the East India Company. That's like, the chairman of the board demands that, like, how many shares are you going to allocate?
He's still manning his first desk.
Yeah.
From the dawn of his corporation.
He's like, I mean, and hey, props to those fucking Dutch people who came up with the concept of legal corporation. Genius idea. But but it's like just a failure to iterate on that concept that has made us have to deal with like these insane requirements, which, and to be fair, there's been heroic work by people to sort of like use an actual computer program to sort of create like a wrapper API to the computer program that is the government bureaucracy, which has been which I had to resort to, a third-party service to sort of like navigate the corporate creation process.
I hate that so much.
It's nature in progress. What it is it's like, it's this thing, and it happens in biology where a lot of times you just get a quick and dirty work solution that then propagates widely, and then it bakes in entropy to the system until a future cataclysm erases it. It's very ecological. So
I just want government bureaucracy to get nuked. Or I don't want that. I want it to be mycelially broken down efficiently
it's happening
for the good of all.
It's happening. Yeah, it's the mycelium are starting to infiltrate already. But that fucking reminds me of something else that I want to just touch on before we go. But I'll finish this thing about the corporation. So forming the corporation was kind of fun because it was. I felt like I was like calling a constructor in the government to instantiate an object, which I was. It was like, I started to see all these parallels and all like the signature blocks and like this thing. I'm like, it's amazing how people across many hundreds of years time, and people who wouldn't think of themselves as programmers, but they think of themselves as corporate lawyers, end up inventing the same basic way of solving problems, of processing information, it gets fascinating, really. It's really interesting. It's like speaks something about like the universality of certain computational processes that are necessary, that there's this abstract landscape of how information changes that is really universal and irrespective of the medium.
Yeah, that's one way to test a hypothesis is, does it act the same and produce the same results in vastly different mediums?
Yeah, is it scale invariant and context invariant?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. So that was interesting.
But you found something about when I was mycelially breaking down the...
I was researching a bunch of stuff, and apparently a few days ago, I think it's launched yesterday. There's this thing, I'm not using this for satellite, but it's just a tangent on this thing about banks and corporations. There's this new bank that was launched by this husband and wife team who had previously created a couple different financial services companies. They're not jokers. They're pretty legit people. And they launched this thing called Column Bank. And what they did is they took, this guy's like a billionaire because he had previously sold his other company. So he had like billions of dollars. So he went and bought a failing regional bank in Northern California for like $100 million or something like that, and bought up their assets. But what he was really buying was the charter. Because to get a charter for a regional bank, it's like impossible.
It's like an alcohol permit in town.
It's like, so what he did is he went and bought this bank, and it would be the equivalent of buying like an old broken down car and then completely gutting it, taking out all the parts, firing everyone, stripping the frame down to the steel, sandblasting it, repainting it, and then reassembling it with like a Tesla engine and like all these modern components. So basically they took this bank, they bought it, and then they turned it into a legal abstract shell of an entity, and then hired like some developers to create a modern like computer system inside it that has like a direct API link to the Federal Reserve. So it's almost like a bank that is very close to the bare metal, computationally speaking, if you think of the financial system as a computer, which it is. Mm-hmm. And the Federal Reserve, like the way in which those, because all of the way that computer systems interact in the banking system is like specified by law. It was like in the 80s or like the 70s or the 80s. And so there is legal requirements to, for example, send information in certain ways, like in a CSV file or some insanely archaic, insane way of doing things. And so that's why like banks are almost as a rule completely broken anytime you try to use like, if you try to interface a computer with a bank, that is a hard problem that is being solved in a million different ways independently by every single bank. So what they've done is they created like a bank as an API that's like this little bridge between the internet and the financial system that has never existed in such a clean format before. And so you can like do things like make an account, and then you can like create like a bank account for your customer with a single line of code. Like that normally doesn't happen. Because you have to like talk to a person who then calls a person who then fills out a form, who then emails the IRS, who then, contacts the terrorist watch list and like, are you child pornography? Like, no, okay, we'll get back to you in 3 business days. Thank you. Like, please be on hold. Like, okay, so normally the kind of bank account system is like, has all these archaic processes, but they've just computerified the whole thing. And it's like, I just wonder, like, this is a very funny little moment in history where there is a niche for such businesses that, like, it's this wrapping thing that it just goes like, okay, because of political reasons, we can't actually make a better solution, but what we can do is create a little kind of like wrapping paper function that wraps and hides all the insane, ugly weirdness of this thing that we're not allowed to get rid of, and wraps it like a clam creates a pearl out of a grain of sand. So it makes this like marketable product. I'm like, so it's really fascinating. So I just think that's where the things are heading.
And that's like embracing things, not as you want them to be, but just embracing them as they are. And then that guy can have a market viable bank.
And I think it's good and it's necessary because maybe you won't always need to wrap the Federal Reserve and computer code in order to have a computer bank. Maybe you could just start from the ground up and just use Bitcoin or something. But what needs to happen is that will force adoption. That will change cultural, like social norms in such a way that people are like start becoming dissatisfied with the fact that things take 3 days. Like, why should it take 3 days for my money to appear in my account? What does that even mean? Appear? Like that's a slow internet connection, bro. If it takes like, why is it that I can video call someone on the different side of the world at megabytes per second of data, and yet a single transact? Like, what's the holdup here? So if people eventually become used to things working fast by whatever means, it'll seem less crazy to be allowed to have nice things in the future.
Yeah.
So high hopes for that. Yeah.
Well, any last words?
The goose seems to have something to say.
Yeah.